All right, guys. All right, guys. Welcome back to the makeup test portion of this makeup work. We are going to work today for your test on an open-ended response. This is something new that's coming on the 8th grade STAR. I know you've been working on it the last couple of weeks in your class, but the thing is, this year it's not all going to be multiple choice. Most of it's multiple choice, but you're going to have either 1, 2, or 3 open-ended response questions, probably 2, where you actually need to write a solid paragraph. You're going to have to really analyze the text. You're going to have to bring a lot of information into it. You're going to have to write a paragraph in answer to a question that has text evidence to support your answer. Okay. So we're going to look at the same poem we did yesterday. We did 2 days ago, Invitation, because we spent some time. It was the hardest one. So if we get to a hard poem, and we have to write an open-ended response. How do we do that? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and use that 3-read method again. And then we're going to come down here and we're going to actually write an open-ended response. So as I get to an open-ended response, let's go down before we read the poem. And I want to take a second to talk about what you need to do this. So here is usually what I get. After reading Invitation, what poetic techniques did the poet use to develop the theme of this poem? And this is usually what I get. Simile. That is not an open-ended response. They want you to write a paragraph. Okay. So if you're not sure what you need to do, we're going to use this. We're going to use racer. Okay. So it just helps you. Your first sentence should restate the question. Then you should answer the question. Then you should put in your textual evidence. In 8th grade, it should really be more, you're going to have evidence for everything that you answer. And I'm going to go back. Let's do this. First, you're going to restate the question. Then you're going to answer the whole question. There's more than one part usually. Answer all the parts. Then you're going to cite textual evidence. Then you're going to explain your evidence. You can't just stick it in there. You have to tell why your evidence backs up what you said. Then you're going to restate your question. So here we go. After reading Invitation, what poetic techniques did the poet use to develop the theme of this poem? Explain your answer and support it with evidence from the text. So here we go. What are they asking? Okay, they're asking, what poetic techniques did the poet use? That's part 1. And they're asking specifically, what poetic techniques did the poet use to develop the theme? So I need to be able to talk about what the theme of this poem is. And then I need to be able to say, and here are the poetic techniques. So now your brain, so if I'm thinking through this question, I'm saying, okay, step 1. It says, how do they do these techniques to develop the theme? So that's the main thing. I've got to be able to explain the theme. So I'm even going to come down here and I'm going to put part 1 theme. I'm making notes. I'm going to be able to change it, but I know I got to talk about the theme. What's the theme? That's the first part of the question I've got to answer. And then what poetic techniques did the poet use? What the heck are poetic techniques? Okay, so poetic techniques, that's anything he does in the poem. It's anything he does in the poem. So if they use the word genre characteristics, it's anything he's doing in that piece of text. If they use the word techniques, it's anything he's doing within that text. So what is he doing? So in a poem, what makes a poem a poem? Okay, rhythm, rhyme, figurative language, imagery. What makes a poem a poem? All that stuff we've talked about. We start talking about graphic elements. You know, do they use capitalization? Do they use punctuation? Do they use spelling? So the graphic elements that they use, the language that they use. Okay, do they use figurative language? How is it used? And what are they doing to develop their theme? So theme and then technique. So basically, what's the theme he wrote? And then how did he support that theme? How did he help you know that theme with what he was writing or what she was writing? So these are just notes for me. Okay, so I know what I'm reading for. I'm reading to understand the theme, and I'm reading to understand which techniques. So notice we broke our habit a little bit because I wanted you to understand how we were going to do this. With an open-ended response, you're still going to do that 3-read if it's on poetry. But if I was you, I might come down and look at the question first to kind of get in my mind. Or just stick with that first read, second read, then come look at the question really carefully And on that third read, go back. So let's go back and do that now. So first read, second read. So here we go. We've already talked about this poem, Invitation. We know there's no capitalization. We don't have a reason why yet, but we know there's no capitalization. We're going to go ahead and read to the punctuation because we've read it before and see if we can pick anything up. Used to write poetry in art class when the teacher wasn't looking, but now I don't take art and I can't afford not to pay attention in my classes. Okay, so this first to the first period, line 5, we've talked about the author wrote poetry he can't write in class anymore. So let's say that a little more deeply. Let's make an inference here, okay? Used to write poetry in art class when the teacher wasn't looking. Okay, that's important. But now I don't take art and I can't afford not to pay attention in my classes anymore. So what could the poet be saying? Why is he telling us this? Used to write poetry in art class when the teacher wasn't looking, but now I don't take art and I can't afford not to pay attention in my classes. Okay, so I'm just going to say the way the poet used to write poetry does not work anymore. You know, maybe the classes are getting too hard because he's growing up. Maybe he's starting to struggle because the classes aren't his thing. But the way the poet used to write poetry doesn't work anymore. So you've said more. You've said the author wrote poetry, can't write in class anymore. That's literally what it's telling you. Now you're implicitly you're inferring the author's meaning. So maybe what the author wants you to see is the way the poet used to write poetry does not work anymore. Okay, let's go to the next period. Now I write poetry in my free time, but that's difficult because words don't appear like a dog when you call their name. No, poetry is anything but convenient. Okay, so we talked about that last time. Words don't appear like a dog when they call your name. Okay, so this is a simile. So we're going to have to be able to talk about this in that essay, that paragraph. So we got to be able to use the word simile. So this is a simile, and the simile is saying, so the author uses a simile to say that words for poetry, or that when you write a poem, it doesn't come easily. And he says a dog that you call comes to you. But when you ask for poetic words, they do not obey. Okay, now look, you're not using his exact words. You're saying in your very own words what the author said. Okay, that's paraphrasing. You're going to want to paraphrase in this. But this right here, this is text evidence. This right here is text evidence because you are paraphrasing what the author did to support your inference that the author is saying when you write a poem, it doesn't come easily. Okay, so the way the poet used to write the poetry does not work anymore. The author is saying that when you write a poem, it doesn't come easily, then he's using a simile and you're telling him what he does. So you're explaining how the simile supports what the author's saying. Okay, here we go. Right now it's 1:05 a.m. because poetry shook me by the shoulders and said, hey, this is important, but now I'm wondering if the lack of sleep is worth it. Okay, pause. We got this one. Poetry shook me by the shoulders. We've got it down here. We know it's figurative language, but we got to go deeper now. What kind of figurative language is it? Okay, so what is it saying? Because poetry shook me by the shoulders. So what's the picture he's going for? Okay, so he's going for, like, if you're asleep, it's 1:05 a.m., you're asleep, somebody shakes you by the shoulders and is trying to wake you up, right? And then he's saying poetry does that. So can poetry really shake you by the shoulders? No, this is personification. So the author uses personification to show that poetry, now you could say something as simple as poetry shaking him awake, but what's he mean by that? Let's try to take it deeper to not just what the poet says, but what the poet means. So the poetry is author uses personification to show that poetry, to show that the poet has to write the words that come to him. Has to write the poet has to write the words that come to him. The poetry, he writes that the poetry, now look, now I'm going to use a direct quote, comma, quotes, shakes, no, shook, let's do it his way, shook me by the shoulders. Okay, look, your direct quote does not have to be a whole giant long line. I quoted 5 words, and that's really what we want. I quoted the most important 5 words right there. And I tied it in to while I was writing. So don't just stick in random quotes. Pick only the words that you need to support what you're saying. We're saying he's using personification to show that the poet has to write the words, and then we're just going to use those short words that show it. It shook me by the poetry, shook me by the shoulders. That's the section of personification that's important. Okay. But now I'm wondering if the lack of sleep is worth it. If you have been doing this, if you're getting up and you're working on something really hard, and then the next day you're like, man, I don't know if it was worth getting up. You think you're doing a good job or a bad job? So the poet is questioning. The poet is questioning whether he should even keep writing. Is it getting him anything? Is writing poetry getting him anything? All right. We're just talking about what it means, okay? I feel I am always weighing time by the quality of poems written. I still don't get that one, so I'm going to skip it. Because even when the words grace me with their presence, okay, I get that. Even when the words grace me with their presence. So even when the words come to him, they don't always choose to step delicately in the world, pink shoes treading softly over the wide horizon. So I think what he's saying there is even when he has the words, comma, even when he has the words, they're not always beautiful. Now, I could be wrong there, but he says they are not, comma quotes, pink shoes, and I'm going to use another short quote, pink shoes treading softly over the white horizon. Again, short quote within the sentence, and I misspelled there, wrong there, T-G-U-apostrophe-R-E. All right, pink shoes treading softly. So I'm making an inference. I could be wrong, but I'm supporting it with evidence, and that's what, are you thinking through this? Okay, are you getting it to some extent? Usually, poetry slops lazily over the couch of a page and dangles while I remove its muddy shoes and rearrange the pillows, all the while muttering something about Frost and how maybe his comments against free verse were right all along. So so he's muttering about Robert Frost, who's a poet, and maybe how Robert Frost, who believed that poetry should rhyme and be beautiful, was wrong. So this is again about writing this kind of poem that's kind of free verse and ugly and not beautiful and all put together. So maybe that's why he's not capitalizing. Oh, there's a thought. Maybe he's not capitalizing. Maybe he's not capitalizing. Maybe the poet does not capitalize his words because he is trying to say that poetry that looks ugly can actually be more meaningful and more beautiful. That's when you go, oh man, maybe I just hit on a big idea. Yes, please. So maybe that's why he doesn't capitalize. And that's a poetic technique. Remember, we're writing about a poetic technique. Okay. So we're making all these great notes that we're going to put together into a paragraph. Okay. So poetry slops lazily over the couch of a page and dangles. So maybe the poetry is saying the poetry comes to him in a messy way. You know, you got the ugly, dirty, muddy shoes versus the pretty pink shoes on a white horizon that wouldn't be messy. His poetry comes to him in an ugly way, and he's having to argue with himself because he's been taught that's not what poetry should look like. So he's arguing with himself while he struggles with his poetry. And then he comes right here. Although honestly, you haven't lived until the homeless free verse poem on your couch. So there you go. There's the rest of the picture. The poem that has the ugly, dirty shoes that he's taken off as they're the homeless guy's shoes. That ugly homeless reverse poem on your couch decides to stay for a cup of tea, and if you're lucky, lets you take notes on everything he says. So this guy is talking about how these ugly, messy free verse poems come to him, and they're not the way that poetry is supposed to look, but they're still beautiful. All right, so what is the theme? What's the thing he wants us to learn from this? What is the theme? So maybe the theme is no one, poetry doesn't always have to look like you are taught in school. It can be ugly. It can look ugly. It can look ugly and still be beautiful and powerful. There's my theme. And then what did it usually about all this evidence that we've talked about? So now let's write we've got all these techniques up ahead. So let's do our racer. We're ready to write our response. Let's write our racer. Restate the question. In the poem, Invitation. See, they started with after reading Invitation. So I'm going to start with in the poem Invitation. I'm restating the question. The poet uses okay, so we're going to answer both parts of the question. I want to talk about the theme first, because then I'm going to talk about how the poetic techniques develop the theme. You could do it the opposite direction, but I'm going to say I've got two parts of the question. I'm talking about the green part first. I'm talking about the theme. In the poem Invitation, I restated the question. The poet wants his readers to learn that poetry, oh, here we go. I've already written this whole line right here. I got the theme. Okay. And I'm just going to cut and paste. Here we go. That poetry doesn't always have to look like you are taught in school. It can look ugly and still be beautiful. I'm going to say on a deeper level, I'm going to take it deeper because it's not always just about poetry. I think he's saying something more. On a deeper level, the poet is making a statement. And all that means theme. I'm still saying theme. You could say the poet is writing the theme that doing life the way you are called to do it is beautiful. Even if no one else agrees. Now, you could take it there. You don't. You could literally take, if you wanted to talk about that deeper level, awesome. If not, you still got a good statement. You're still answering the question about the theme. Okay? So let's go with that. In the poem, I've got more evidence for this, so I'm going to keep it clean. I'm going to take that out. In the poem Invitation, the poet wants his readers to learn that poetry doesn't always have to look like you are taught, look like what you are taught in school. It can look ugly and still be beautiful and powerful. He uses capitalization. And then we said he used simile. So I've got it here. He used capitalization, he used simile, and he used personification. He uses capitalization, simile, and personification to make his point. Okay, so I have restated the question. I have answered the whole question. I've talked about the theme and I've talked about the poetic techniques. But now I have to cite that textual evidence. And I've already thought through it up here. I want the sentence where I talk about the capitalization. There it is. I'm going to highlight it in yellow. I want the sentence where I talk about the personification. There it is. I'm going to highlight it in yellow. And I want the sentence where I talk about the simile. There it is. I'm going to highlight it in yellow. I want those three sentences because that's my text evidence. And since I said in this one, I put it in order, capitalization, simile, personification, that's how I'm going to put my sentences in order. So I'm coming back here. Maybe I'm having to rewrite my notes, but I'm going to take this sentence, Control C. I'm going to copy it. If I'm typing, I'm going to put it right down here. That's my evidence. All right. So here we go. Now I'm going to take out the maybe because I'm at this point, I'm writing and I'm saying this is what I believe is true. So I don't want to have any maybes, I thinks. I'm just going to say it like it's true and hope they agree with me. Okay? Stronger writing. The poet does not capitalize anything in his poem, including the title, because he is trying to say that poetry that looks ugly can actually be more meaningful and beautiful. Now, this is great. This is enough, but something great just came to my brain. And if something great comes to your brain, okay, you need to add it in, because this is where you move from a 3, which is doing well, to a 4 that's doing brilliant. Remember we had that question the first time we read it about right here. He capitalizes the word frost. And Robert Frost is the poet who's arguing that it always needs to be beautiful, that poetry always needs to be beautiful. That's the sentence that makes this a 4. So here we go. The one exception the poet makes to this rule is capitalizing frost. In his mind, he is arguing with Robert Frost, the poet, who believed, okay, in his mind, he's arguing with Robert Frost, the poet, who believed that all poetry should have form, should have a specific poetic form. So he capitalizes Frost to show that disagreement with his free, wild, poetic style. All right, bam, that's where you move to a 4. Now, if you don't have that thought, great, say it a 3. A 3 is awesome. But if you get a thought like that, you need to put it in. The next one we said was, we said capitalization, we said simile. Okay, I'm going to do a simile. There's my simile sentence, Control C. Right here, I'm going to a new thought, so I need a transition word, then, comma, the author. And you know what? I should probably say poet more than I say author here. I'm going to make this little change here, editing as I go. Then the poet uses a simile to say that when you write a poem, it doesn't come easily. A dog that you call comes to you, but when you ask for poetic words, they do not obey. And I need to connect this. This is not connected. I know what I'm saying about the simile, but how does that support the theme that all poetry is not beautiful? Okay, so dog that you call comes to you, but when you ask for poetic words, they do not obey. And sometimes when they obey, they are not as pretty as you had hoped. Now let's go right here. Let's go with the personification. Okay, now I got to connect it again. So this personification is the words need to get out. But the words, beautiful or not, need to get out. And I'm going to put that sentence in. I've connected it. So there's my connection word. The poet uses personification to show that she has to write the words that come to her. I like to change it from she to he, just for a girl's thing. She writes that the poetry shook me by the poet has, you have to write what comes to you. But it is the final line that makes this theme come together. I'm going to put that final line in there because that's it. I'm going back and this is one of those thoughts that I thought of. It's again personification. If you're lucky, and I'm just going to paraphrase this one instead of quoting it, but it's the final line that makes this theme come together because the poet again uses personification. That says, even if the poem that comes to you is ugly is ugly and dirty. Like a homeless is dirty, is messy. I think messy. I don't like using the word messy in the with a homeless person, but is messy like a homeless person. That even the poem, even because the poet again uses personifications that says, even if the poem that comes to you is messy like a homeless person, if you sit and let the words come, they are powerful and true. That's it. Look at this, guys. I need you to get this, okay? This is what an open-ended response should look like. It takes time. You got to spend a good 20, 30 minutes. Okay. You got to spend a good 20, 30 minutes analyzing what you're being asked and writing it with text evidence and not just dropping in quotes, but incorporating it, putting in a brilliant thought to get you to a 4. This is what I'm getting. That's what I'm getting. No more one-word answers. No more one-word answers. Open-ended response. Give me a paragraph. Give us a paragraph. Really show what your thinking is. That's what we need. Okay. Now, this was a long video. You've only got one question on your final test exam. Go ahead and go down to your next step on your page and get your final test exam question. I know you know it's going to be an open-ended response on a poem we haven't done before. I highly suggest you write down Racer right here. I'll tell you what, I'm going to make sure Racer is in the notes. Have those Racer notes in front of you so that you can make sure you do all the steps. Okay. Oh, sorry, we explained our evidence. We didn't restate the question. Oh, crap. Let's go back and restate that question real quick. So, uh, if you sit there, let the words come or power. Oh, no, we did. That's it. We wrapped it up because we said, even if the poem comes to you, it's messy like a homeless person. If you sit and let the words come, they are powerful and true. So that takes us back to his theme. That takes us back to his theme. We got it. We got it. Okay, we're good. All right, guys, good luck. Hope you do well. Give me more than simile. Here we go.